Evening all. Well, if it's evening when you're watching this, are Remainers to blame for the current hard Brexit or no deal Brexit that we're facing? Short answer, no, but it's worth discussing because there was one point in early 2019 where I thoroughly agonized over this. So it is worth discussing. The main argument here is that because Remainers were so bloody minded and focused on getting a people's vote so that they could remain, they missed opportunities to get an actual soft Brexit or even a softer Brexit than what we're facing now. The crux point, the real decision point, and the point at which I agonized was back in January through to March 2019, when Theresa May was first bringing her deal before Parliament. The first time she brought it before Parliament was on January the 15th, and it got voted down by a whopping 432 to 202. And we all celebrated, those of us in the People's Vote campaign and associated with it, and the ERG did as well, because they voted against it too. So she was kind of attacked from both sides. And I thought at that time, crikey, what are we doing here? Are we missing out on an opportunity to get a withdrawal agreement for the sake of upping the stakes against the ERG, who we know to be very well organized, very determined, and so forth and so on. So that was my point of anguish, and I think this is the main point in time to which those who are saying, now looking back, it was the Remainers' fault, are actually pointing at. However, what was I fearful of? Like, if it went wrong, what was it that I thought was going to happen whereby the gamble had not paid off? And that was actually a no-deal Brexit and a crash-out Brexit. Now, back then, not like now, that no-deal Brexit and crash-out Brexit meant leaving the EU when we were thoroughly unprepared at the borders, and I mean thoroughly, and also when we wouldn't be paying that 39 billion as settlement, so it would leave lots of legal disputes open. And furthermore, it's in the middle of funding programs like the science funding programs, so contracts that were currently running with big teams of people, thousands of different contracts, would be stopped dead on the spot. That is what I was fearful of taking this gamble against by voting down Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. Okay. But that gamble paid off because Theresa May, when she then brought it back again and failed again, then did not go through with her no deal is better than a bad deal. She actually asked the EU for an extension, and the EU granted it until the 22nd of May that year. And then so she tried bringing back her deal again, and it got voted down again. So she went for another extension until October the 31st. She was not prepared to go down that immediate crash out Brexit route. That is the gamble that we took, knowing the makeup of Parliament at the time and what they would countenance and what they wouldn't. And that's what we managed to do. Now, then Boris Johnson came into power over the summer, and he was dead determined to actually have a no-deal Brexit. Hence, during September and October 2019, all of those accusations of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings wanting to wind down the clock. But the makeup of Parliament was such that us Remainers could convince them to again put in legislation to stop that crash out no deal Brexit and force them to actually get a withdrawal agreement. And that's what was done. And I remember sitting in a room with Anna Soubry where I was saying, but how tight is this? Because he's just said he would rather be dead in a ditch than actually go for an extension, and her telling me, no, we've got this locked up through all the lawyers. He will be breaking the law if he tries to come out without a deal and without an extension. And sure enough, he went and got that extension. Then he negotiated a deal and he spun it round like, isn't this great? I've invented a deal. Whereas in fact, what it was just a copy paste of one of Theresa May's previous deals. And so that gamble that we took back at that time against Theresa May's deal was against a crash out without a withdrawal agreement. As it happens, we got a withdrawal agreement that is very, very, very similar to Theresa May's. It was just in different wrapping. Let me explain. So it covered the financial agreement, the settlement between the EU and the UK. It kept free movement and the science program and all the trading arrangements until the end of 2020. So the multi-annual financial framework of the EU. So basically, what we've got, even though he claimed it was his oven-ready deal, and you can tell that he was on that, but nevertheless, we did force that withdrawal agreement to happen. And if I take you right back to what would have happened if we decided to sign up at the time to Theresa May's deal, would that have been any different from now? Actually, no, not at all. It was a near identical deal that she would have gotten. Then she would have been deposed immediately, because that's what all the hardcore Brexiteers were saying. If she goes for this deal, it will be betrayal. We're not having it. Okay. So she would have got that deal, would have then been deposed. And I remind you, on that third vote for her deal, only 6% of the public thought it was a good deal. So Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, backed by the ERG, coming in at that stage, would have put us into exactly the position now where they were sitting on a deal that ends at the end of 2020 and whereby they are itching for a crash out. But additionally, they would have had the extra ammo that this deal is a betrayal deal. Only 6% of the public wanted it. And the only difference to Theresa May's deal was actually that there was this, like a customs union, but it was with the EU, but it was temporary. It was meant to end as soon as we get an FTA. So it was still a gangplank that then allowed crashing out at the end of 2020. We kept saying at the time it was a blind Brexit, it was a gangplank to nowhere. And so that's actually what we were looking at the time. So the notion that, oh, if only Remainers had accepted compromise previously, we wouldn't be facing a hard Brexit or a crash out Brexit. Theresa May's deal was a hard Brexit. It was outside the single market, outside the customs union after some temporary buffering. It was throwing away free movement. It was outside the ECJ. It was all of those red lines. Independent, sovereign nation, having a distant FTA agreement with the EU. That's what she was gunning for as the solution from 2020 onwards. As to the actual proper soft Brexit, which is your Norway-style model or your Switzerland-style model, that got ruled out very early on by Theresa May in a Lancaster House speech. So it's not as though at that stage Remainers were like, we want to overturn this, we're not going to contemplate even a single market solution. The Britain Stronger in Europe campaign converted to Open Britain and was arguing all the way through until 2018 for single market, single market, single market. And it was Theresa May and her government and the BBC that was shutting that down repeatedly. I remember when the head of Open Britain was on with Andrew Neil and trying to make the argument for the single market and showing all of the clips of when Vote Leave people had said, we can have a relationship like Norway and Switzerland. And Andrew Neil was trying to sort of pan him and say, no, everyone understood that it was leaving the single market. Whereas in fact, they'd done polling at the time showing that even amongst leavers, only a minority of thought that would be outside free movement and the single market. So that was a narrative that was driven and driven and driven, then embedded by Theresa May, who wanted to impress the Brexiteers. So the single market was off the table. And it was also off the table for a lot of Labour people. So by the time we got to Theresa May's offering, and this is the key thing, the single market deal just wasn't there. It was dead. It was only by rejecting her deal, then rejecting it again and again, that we got one extension and then another extension. And then you had some more exotic options, popping up later on, but none of them could get a majority. And by the time that we got into October, we actually had a majority for preventing at least the no deal crash out, and quite possibly teeing up for another vote on the actual deal as it was. But there was never actually at any point along the path where you had a single market solution with a majority available from the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. And so I think this narrative that we could have got it if we only wanted it is wrong. We did prevent a crash out Brexit at the time, and we got pretty close to having a second referendum. And it was a complex environment. It was certainly full of plenty of mistakes everywhere. But I think this false narrative that I've seen peddled a lot actually deeply misunderstands the May deal and where it would have taken us. It was just that withdrawal agreement. It was a gangplank to nowhere with no agreements thereafter. And furthermore, as Theresa May was negotiating it, then there were plans already that anything that was binding in the long run could be ripped up. And I've got this here on my phone because in March 2019, when Theresa May was negotiating a withdrawal agreement with the EU, Dominic Cummings, who was then out of power, wrote in his blog, "Also don't worry about the so-called permanent commitments this historically abysmal cabinet are trying to make on our behalf. They are not permanent, and a serious government, one not cowed by officials and their bullshit legal advice, with which they have herded ministers like sheep, will dispense with these commitments and any domestic law enforcing them." So it was quite clear from Cummings and others like the ERG at the time that anything that Theresa May signed would get ripped up shortly after she was deposed. So if her deal had gone through, then we would be here now, probably with Boris Johnson government again, but very much with the same intention of ripping up the deal. But this time it's someone else's deal. That you can call it a betrayal deal. But they'd be very happy to do that because, look, even the deal that they signed themselves, they're prepared to, tonight, they just did it, put in provisions that break international law in order to rip up the deal that they themselves crafted and they themselves signed. So it would have taken us to for the most part, a very similar place, as far as I can judge. Yeah, that'll do. Catch you all later.